Welcome to Cheating Story Star, where every story uncovers the secrets people hide behind love, marriage, and trust. Tonight's story begins with a mysterious message at 2:17 in the morning, and a wife who suddenly realizes her husband may be closer to the truth than she ever expected. After 31 years of marriage, one strange moment sends a devoted husband looking into memories. He thought he understood. What he discovers will force him to question everything he believed about his family, his marriage, and the woman beside him. Let's begin. My name is Richard. I'm 62 years old, and until a few years ago, I honestly believed I knew everything about my marriage. I had been married to my wife Susan for 31 years. 31 years. That's a long time to share a life with someone. You raise children together, you buy a house, you celebrate birthdays and anniversaries, you go through sickness, money problems, family arguments, and all the ordinary things that come with growing old together. You start believing you know that person better than anyone else. At least that's what I believed. Until one night, at exactly 2:17 in the morning, I saw my wife's face change after reading a message on her phone. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't, and what she whispered under her breath that night, 31 years, was the beginning of something I never could have imagined. At first, I thought she was hiding another man. I thought maybe she was having an affair. I thought I'd eventually find a name, a number, some message that would explain everything. I was wrong. What I eventually discovered wasn't just about my wife's betrayal. It was about my son. A photograph, an old hospital record, a man's name I had never heard before, and a secret that had been sitting inside my marriage for more than 3 decades. The hardest part wasn't finding out that my wife had lied to me. It was realizing how many times I had looked directly at the truth and trusted her enough to look away. This is what happened. And if I'm being honest, I still don't know whether the person I was before that night would recognize the man I became afterward. I remember the exact time. 2:17 in the morning. I had been awake for about 12 minutes, staring at the ceiling and trying to fall back asleep. Susan was lying beside me. I thought she was asleep. Then her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She grabbed it before it could vibrate a second time. That was the first thing that bothered me. Not the message. Not even the time. The speed. She turned away from me and looked at the screen. Then she froze. I watched her shoulders tighten. She didn't move for a few seconds. Then I heard her whisper, 31 years? I sat up. What did you say? She turned toward me. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then she smiled. I know my wife. After 31 years together, I know the difference between her real smile and the one she uses when she's trying to hide something. This was the second kind. Who is that? I asked. Nobody. Nobody. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I knew it wasn't true. She slipped the phone underneath her pillow. I didn't ask again. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Something had changed. I just didn't know what. For the next few minutes, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was work. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe there was some perfectly reasonable explanation. But there was one problem. Susan had never been good at hiding fear from me. And that night, she was afraid. I could feel it. I closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. She eventually turned over. I didn't. I stayed awake until morning. And somewhere between 2:17 and sunrise, I made myself a promise. Whatever she was hiding from me, I was going to find out. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to accuse her. I wasn't even going to ask the same question twice. I was going to wait and watch. Because after 31 years of marriage, I knew something else about my wife. When Susan was hiding something, she always left something behind. For the next 6 days, I acted like nothing had happened. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Every morning, I kissed my wife goodbye. I asked what she wanted for dinner. I listened to her talk about ordinary things. The neighbor's dog. The grocery store. Her sister's upcoming birthday. Normal things. Our normal life. But inside my head, nothing was normal anymore. I started noticing things I had never paid attention to before. She took her phone with her when she went upstairs. She started keeping it face down on the table. Sometimes she'd leave the room to answer a call, and whenever I walked in, the conversation would suddenly become shorter. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Then I started thinking about Daniel, our middle child. Daniel had always looked different from the rest of us. Our oldest daughter looked like me. Our youngest son had my eyes. But Daniel? People used to joke that he looked like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong family. Even the doctor had made a comment when Daniel was born. At the time, we laughed. Susan laughed the hardest. I never thought about it again. Not until that week. Then another memory came back. Daniel was 14 when he once asked why we didn't have many pictures from the hospital when he was born. Susan answered before I could. They were lost. I believed her. Of course I did. She was my wife. I had no reason to question her. Or at least I thought I didn't. 6 days after that message, I was looking for my passport in an old bedroom drawer. That's when I found the envelope. It had Susan's handwriting on it. There was no name, only a date. October 14th, Daniel's birthday. I remember sitting there for a few seconds, staring at that date. I don't know why, but I already felt uneasy. I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Susan was standing outside a hospital. She was 28 years old, pregnant, and beside her stood a man I'd never seen before. His hand was around her waist. They weren't standing like strangers. They looked comfortable. Familiar. Too familiar. I turned the photograph over. There were 3 words written on the back. He knows nothing. I read them once, then again, then a third time. My hands were shaking. I sat on the bedroom floor. I wish I could tell you I immediately understood everything. I didn't. I spent the next hour trying to find another explanation. Maybe the photograph wasn't what I thought. Maybe the man was a friend. Maybe the handwriting wasn't hers. Maybe he wasn't me. But deep down, I already knew. I just wasn't ready to admit it. I wanted to confront Susan. I almost did. 3 times. But every time I looked at her, I stopped myself. I knew that if I confronted her too early, she'd have time to build another story. And I didn't want another story. I wanted the truth. So I kept quiet. I started with the photograph. The hospital name was visible in the background. I called the hospital and asked about their old records. After a few conversations and a lot of waiting, I was able to confirm some details. Daniel had been born there. That wasn't surprising. But then I asked about the birth records. I needed to know who had signed the paperwork. A few days later, I got my answer. My name was there. Susan's name was there. And underneath our names was another. Dr. Michael Reeves. At first, the name meant nothing to me. Then I remembered an old box of insurance papers in the garage. I went through them. And there it was. Michael Reeves. A medical invoice from 31 years ago. He had been Susan's doctor. The doctor who had delivered Daniel. I sat there staring at that piece of paper. My mind started putting things together. Susan had always told me Daniel's birth had been difficult. She had told me the doctors wouldn't let me into the delivery room. She had told me I'd been moved to another floor because there had been some kind of emergency. I had believed every word, but the hospital records told me something different. I had arrived before Daniel was born. I had been waiting nearby. There was no reason for anyone to move me. Someone had wanted me away from that room, and suddenly I had a very good idea who. I ordered a private DNA test. I didn't tell Susan. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't doing it because I wanted revenge. I needed certainty. I needed something I couldn't argue with. Something that couldn't be explained away. While I waited, I continued living normally. Susan would sit across from me at dinner and talk about retirement. She talked about traveling. She talked about where we'd go when we were older. Sometimes she'd smile at me, and I'd smile back. But every time I looked at her, I wondered how many times she'd sat across from me over the years while knowing something I didn't. Then Daniel called me. We talked for about 20 minutes. It was a normal conversation at first. Then, right before he hung up, he said something that made my whole body go cold. Dad, Mom told me you're not my biological father. I couldn't answer. I just sat there. Dad? I finally asked him when she'd told him. Yesterday. I looked across the room. Susan was standing in the doorway. She had heard me, and from the look on her face, I knew. She knew that I knew. For 31 years, she'd managed to keep this secret between herself and another man. Now it was falling apart, and I was finally standing in the middle of it. The DNA results came on a Tuesday morning. I remember holding the envelope in my hand and just staring at it. Part of me didn't want to open it, because once I did, there would be no going back. I finally opened it. I read the result. Then I read it again. Daniel wasn't my biological son. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I expected to feel angry. I expected to feel sick. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. because all those questions in my head finally had an answer. A few minutes later, Susan walked into the kitchen. She saw the envelope. Then she looked at me. She didn't ask what it was. She already knew. She slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. I pushed the report toward her. She didn't touch it. Her eyes filled with tears. "Richard," I shook my head. "Who was he?" She started crying. I had imagined that moment many times. I thought seeing her cry would make me feel better. It didn't. She finally said the name. "Michael? Dr. Michael Reeves, the man in the photograph. The man who had delivered my son. The man whose name had been sitting in our family history for 31 years, without me knowing why." Then she told me something else. Michael had died 11 years earlier. She said they had never really stayed together. She said she'd made a mistake. She said she regretted it. I listened. Then she told me about the letter. A lawyer had contacted her. Michael had left a letter mentioning Daniel. Apparently, he had wanted the truth known. That's why she'd received the message at 2:17 in the morning. I finally understood. That message wasn't the beginning of the secret. It was the beginning of the secret coming apart. I looked at Susan. There was one question I needed answered. "Did you ever love me?" She was crying when she said, "I did." I nodded. For some reason, that hurt more than if she'd said no. Because I finally understood something. A person can love you and still lie to you. They can sleep beside you for 31 years. They can raise children with you. They can tell you they love you, and still keep another life hidden from you. I picked up the DNA report. Then I placed the photograph beside it. "You didn't destroy my marriage," I said. She looked at me. "You destroyed the version of me that trusted you." She started crying harder. For once, I had nothing left to say. Neither did she. By the time Susan finished crying, I'd already made my decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to insult her. I wasn't going to have an affair just to make her feel what I'd felt. And I wasn't going to destroy her in front of our children. That would have been easy. I wanted something else. I wanted to leave. The next morning, I met with a lawyer. I separated our finances. I changed the beneficiaries on my accounts. I started moving my personal things out of the house, Susan noticed. She asked me what I was doing. I told her. "I'm leaving." She didn't argue at first. I think she was still hoping I'd eventually calm down. But I had been calm from the beginning. That was what she didn't understand. The anger had already passed. What was left was certainty. The most important conversation I had was with Daniel. I called him. I told him everything I knew. But I made one thing very clear. None of it was his fault. He didn't choose the lie. He didn't ask for any of this. He started crying. And honestly, so did I. But when he called me dad, something inside me settled. Biology didn't erase 31 years. I had been there when he was sick. I had taught him how to ride a bike. I had helped him with homework. I had stood beside him when he graduated. I had been the one he called when his marriage fell apart. That mattered. A blood test couldn't erase that. A week later, I went back home for the last time. Susan was waiting for me in the living room. She looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen her. "I don't want to lose you," she said. I looked around the room. Our pictures were everywhere. 31 years of memories. Christmas mornings, family vacations, birthdays, Daniel's graduation, our anniversary. I looked at one photograph for a long time. There was a younger version of me standing beside Susan. That man looked happy. He had no idea what was coming. For a moment, I felt sorry for him. Then Susan said, "You can forgive me." I looked at her. I could. I saw a little hope return to her face. Then I said, "But forgiving you doesn't mean I have to stay." Her face changed. I placed an envelope on the table. She opened it. Inside were copies of everything. The photograph, the hospital records, the DNA report, Michael's letter, and the separation agreement. She stared at me. "You planned all of this?" I nodded. "Since the night you hid your phone." She started crying again. I picked up my coat. As I reached the door, she called my name. I stopped. She asked me one question. Was none of it real? I stood there for a moment. Then I turned around. It was real to me, and that was the last thing I ever said to her as her husband. I walked out. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I just left. I wish I could tell you that walking away felt amazing. It didn't. It felt strange, almost empty. For 31 years, my entire life had been built around the same person. Then suddenly I was alone. I had to learn how to live in a house where nobody was waiting for me. I had to learn how to eat dinner without having someone across the table. I had to get used to silence. At first, I hated it. Then slowly, I started appreciating it. I stopped checking my phone. I stopped wondering where Susan was. I stopped thinking about who she might be talking to. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. Daniel and I stayed close. Our relationship changed in some ways, but it didn't disappear. One evening, he asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Dad, do you regret raising me?" I looked at him, and the answer came immediately. Never. He wasn't responsible for what his mother had done. Neither was I. I didn't choose to be lied to. But I did choose what I was going to do after I found out. Months later, I found that old photograph again. Susan. Michael. The hospital. That secret sentence on the back. He knows nothing. I held the photograph for a few seconds. Then I threw it away. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need the hospital records. I didn't need the DNA report. I didn't need Michael's letter. I already knew the truth. For a long time, I thought the worst thing Susan had taken from me was 31 years. But I eventually realized that wasn't true. The worst thing was making me question my own judgment, making me wonder whether all those years had been real. They were real to me. My memories were real. My love for my children was real. The man I had been was real. She couldn't take that away. She could lie about the past. She could hide the truth. She could betray me. But she couldn't rewrite the years I had actually lived. I don't hate her anymore. Honestly, I don't think about her very much. And maybe that's the part I never expected. Because revenge isn't always watching someone suffer. Sometimes revenge is simply reaching a point where they no longer have any power over your emotions. Susan kept a secret from me for 31 years. I kept my decision to leave for 6 days, and when I finally walked away, I didn't take revenge. I took my life back. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't understand at 2:17 that morning. The truth didn't destroy me. It only showed me that I had already survived the worst part. I had trusted the wrong person, but I didn't have to spend the rest of my life becoming the wrong version of myself because of it. And that is the one thing she could never take from me. My life was mine again.